Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening depending on where you are in this amazing world. My name is Donovan Jolly, and welcome everybody once again for another amazing video of DIY investing. For today's video, I'm going to be doing an in-depth view of market cycles, taking a look at the current market cycle for Bitcoin, analyzing the last 2 years of the trend, and then comparing it to the last 3 bear markets that we've went through. This cycle is vastly different than any of the prior cycles, and when I get down and explain to you guys the details, I know that some of this is really going to blow your mind and change your perception on exactly what the long-term projection of Bitcoin truly is. If you're new and just find this channel, always remember to do me a favor by leaving a like, comment, and subscribing to this channel for more updates. Always remember to click the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these amazing videos like the one provided for you here. And make sure you guys sign up and join the Discord server, or go ahead and download my free ebook. Links are in the description for both. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, so here we are to jump into this, talking about the long-term projection of Bitcoin, analyzing the last few market cycles. I want to bring to your guys' attention some differences in this cycle and what it could potentially mean for the long-term trend of Bitcoin. Now, I've talked about a lot of these differences, but we're going to go through and I'm going to kind of compare them to you guys in a live view, walking through all of those old market cycles and really sharing with you guys just how vastly different everything is. So let's first start off by looking at basically the last couple years of Bitcoin's price action. Now, right over here was March of 2020 when we had the COVID capitulation. And then this is where we made that massive run to 65,000. Now, you guys already know that the way that I'm personally looking at this, I'm looking at this as being a massive ABC correction, with the top at 65,000 actually our true cycle top. And so it ends up looking something like this. A, B, the run all the way up to 69,000 was the top of a B wave. It wasn't an impulse. This isn't an impulsing type move like what we saw here. This is a corrective type move after a large impulse. And then this entire move that we've had from 69,000 all the way back down to 17,500, that was the completion of this C leg. And so, not to get into too much in-depth view of Elliott wave theory, but this is just a bigger, expansive version of what is called an expanded flat correction. This is basic Elliott wave rules. I've tried to teach you guys how to understand these because I think it's really easy for the average person to catch on. You don't have to get really in-depth to be able to see these. Now, inside of every Elliott wave impulse, we have 3 waves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ABC. ABC is our corrective. It's not always going to be an ABC, but that's just the average. And so, as a rule of thumb, this is kind of going to be what the corrective wave will look like. Now, inside of a wave 3 is generally the biggest. The most volume comes into the market. If we're looking at the Bitcoin chart, wave 3 was when Bitcoin went from $3,800 all the way to 65,000. And wave 1 would have been the move from $3,200 to $14K, right? So wave 1 was down here. Wave 3 was this big move right here. And where I believe that we are inside the Bitcoin chart is inside of a wave 4 correction, right? So this entire ABC correction was us just inside of a major wave 4. And what we're still waiting for is our major wave 5 to complete this big picture impulse. Am I going to say that Bitcoin is dead after we have one more impulse? Of course not. I just think that we could have more than a year, maybe even over 2 years of a bear market that would follow shortly after. And so when we're looking at this, Bitcoin being in an expanded flat, let me explain to you guys what that truly means. So if we come over here and take a look at an expanded flat correction, this is an example of basically a correction that can happen inside of a 4 wave if you're looking at Elliott wave theory rules. And this is exactly the same thing that happened with Bitcoin. Now, the reason why I'm not looking at this as an impulse is because we barely broke previous all-time highs. If we're looking at Bitcoin and we're thinking in terms of the last 12 years of the Bitcoin trend, Bitcoin is known for making big, impulsive type of moves. It doesn't make these short little impulses that barely break all-time highs, and that's why I view this as a corrective move. I don't think it's an impulsive move. I just feel that this is a much more greater type of correction than really what we've been accustomed to seeing before. Now, when we're looking at this chart, we're going to draw a line here. We're going to make it white. And we're going to draw a line down here at our support. Because if we're looking at how this plays out, we can see that we're going to draw our box. We're going to draw our box at the high, and then we get our ABC down here. A, B, C, right? Keep in mind that this right here we're going to make bigger, just so you know that this is a larger scale correction. Now what we see here on the upside is another A, B, C. But if you notice that this C leg actually breaks past our all-time highs, or this box. And that's exactly what happened here. We can see A, B, C. Once again, we're going to make these smaller so that you guys can understand that there's just a smaller term correction. And then what we see on the downside is basically a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 impulse. And the real impulse, I'm on a weekly time frame, but the real impulse would be right here. This would have been our wave 3 to the downside, and then this would have been our wave 5 to the downside. It's just hard to kind of see it on a weekly time frame, but if I were to zoom in, that's where we would see our one wave impulse. And so what we notice here is at the bottom of wave 5, we actually go all the way below our previous support. When we normally were correcting and then we made the new all-time high, we end up going all the way below that support for one pretty much final capitulation below that. And that's what we can see pretty much played out at the very end of wave 5 of 5. And then that's where pretty much we got our, this is where our pi cycle indicator came in. We have an indication that's flashing in here at this low. We've been talking about that in the last few videos. So when we're looking at this, I view this as a larger wave 4 correction. So because I'm viewing this as a wave 4, we're going to go ahead and remove all of these. We're going to go ahead and zoom out on this chart. Because I view this as a longer term wave 4, what we're missing is our wave 5. And that's what I believe our next cycle ultimately is. Now our next cycle can still follow the 4-year cycle theory. And if we're following the 4-year cycle theory, keep in mind, guys, that the pi cycle low has already been confirmed here on our weekly time frame, on our daily time frame. It's confirmed on all of our shorter time frames here. Our pi cycle low is flashed at every major bottom that we've had as far as a bear market low. And what we see inside of this signal being given is normally once this red line becomes resistance and we have capitulation below, that's when we get a confirmed bottom. What we saw in 2015 was a lengthier period of consolidation here. It took us about a year before we ultimately started that new bull run. But we did get that pi cycle low that came right at the very bottom of the trend. And now this is where I kind of want to talk to you guys a little bit more about market cycles, because I think that this is where, you guys can actually learn a lot inside of your own trading plans. Now, we're going to go all the way back to we're just going to remove the pi indicator because I want to go all the way back to even the first cycles. We're going to go to a shorter time frame. Now, the reason why I want to talk to you guys about all of these charts is simply just because I feel like this cycle that we're in today is just a lot different than what you would consider all of the previous bear markets in Bitcoin's past. Now, we're going to come up here. We're going to overlay this here. Now, what we can see is Bitcoin follows variances of this. Now, at the end of the day, no market cycle is ever going to be exactly the same, and we can see that throughout every single bear market that Bitcoin's ever been in. But what we do know inside of a general bear market of a big picture market cycles will always behave in a similar fashion. Yes, the price action can vary, but the market cycle itself will always be relatively the same because it's the same people, the same humans, and our emotions that drive the price. And that's why we see these same expansive cycles play out over the same time frames. The price action may even look the same in a lot of senses. And that's why we can actually see this, is because ultimately it's the emotions that are being played out over a given time. Humans are just creatures of habit, and so we repeat the same exact habits over and over and over and over and over again. Now, when we're looking at the first cycle, it follows very closely to this type of move. You get your major impulse. We get our blow off top. We start the bear market back down. This depression made a lower low, whereas this one, you could look at it as a couple different ways. Capitulation, anger, depression, and then disbelief. That's where we start our first move in the cycle. So then fast forward, that takes us to the next cycle. We get another big expansive parabolic move. and then that leads to a blow off top, right? Now, this is pretty much the same exact chart before. There's definitely some variances. This looks a little bit different than this, but for the most part, you guys get the picture that I'm trying to paint here. After the blow off top, we start the bear market back down. You know, the corrective move is always going to be a little different. Capitulation, anger, depression. We would probably look at that as this type of move throughout here. You know, once we hit this sell-off, we broke, made a lower low, and then that took us to another major capitulation. True capitulation is just whenever the trend ends, right? You know, this kind of comes throughout here, and technically this one makes a lower low, but it doesn't matter. We're not looking at this chart to be 100% exact. What we're looking for is just your classic example of a market cycle, where we have a blow off top, we make a bear market decline that pretty much erases the majority of that move. Now, depending on what the asset class is, you're going to have deeper corrections. There's so many different variables that play into this. But inside of Bitcoin corrections, we've generally just seen about an 80 to an 85% sell-off. Now, in the same sort of fashion, we get the disbelief. That's really just the first impulse, and that's when we start the new bull market. Now, this has all been very much the same in every single cycle. And then we kind of get over here in our most recent bear market that we've ever had. And once again, we follow almost the same fashion. Not only were all the time frames the same, the price action was a little bit different. We got this big descending triangle throughout this time. But for the most part, it followed roughly the same sort of thing that we were looking for, right? What we were looking for was roughly this pattern. And in my opinion, we did see that. And I was able to see that and point it out in a lot of my earlier videos, taking place all the way back in 2018, 2019, 2020, when I talked a lot about this stuff. And I think it's time that we start talking about this stuff again, but maybe in a little bit of a different light, because what we're seeing is different, right? And that's what we think, that's what I think we should pay attention for, because if we pay attention for these differences, they're going to ultimately translate into the next cycle. And the more that we can stay ahead of these things, the more money we can ultimately bring in for ourselves. Now, in the same sort of fashion, blow off top, same thing. We get a bear market decline. It looks quite a bit different than any of the other bear markets, but, you know, it still followed the same degree. It was the same time frames. We corrected about a mid 80% sell-off, so it wasn't anything new, right? Now, we get the bottom here, capitulation, anger, depression. In my opinion, we just got all of that here. Capitulation, anger, depression. It was just really all kind of in one encompassing sell-off. We sold off really hard after we broke down from almost a year worth of a descending triangle. This was basically 8 months that we were consolidating in here. And then for us to finally break through that and then just go sideways for 3 months, that was literally the combination of all of these. It was just kind of a small example of that. And then what happened after was Bitcoin going on one of the biggest and quickest higher highs out of a bear market that we'd ever seen before. This was one of the most volatile moves. We went all the way up to 14K and then corrected all the way back down to near the breakout point and the bear market bottom. Something we had never seen. But that's pretty much just what you would see in a disbelief phase, right? Higher high, back down. It's just the disbelief phase. Oh, this is a sucker's rally. That's what everybody said. I remember watching when Bitcoin was all the way down here at 5,800, even 3,500, whatever those lows were. I remember throughout this entire period how bearish everybody was, how everybody was in the disbelief phase. This is a sucker's rally. And it gave me a lot of confidence to continue to buy throughout that period of time, even though it was so scary, right? And then, once again, we went into a cycle. Now, guys, this is where things are just different. If we're looking at our most recent corrective phase for Bitcoin, this is not our standard bear market. Whether you call it a bear market, it's the length of time of a bear market, it's the in-depth corrective type of move as a bear market so far. So at this point, you know, you could definitely call this a bear market. But with it being a bear market, when we're looking at all of the prior bear markets that we've seen, it's so much different. And that's why I think that if you call it a bear market, it's not going to reflect the same way prior bear markets have, because the price action itself is different. This itself is more of what I would just say is a bearish correction. I wouldn't say a true bear market because I don't actually look at it in that same way. If we're looking at this type of a pattern again, you know, this really isn't it. if we're looking at where we saw true peak euphoria was right here. This was when Dogecoin was taking off. This was when SafeMoon was taking off. This was when all of those random meme coins were taking off. NFTs first started to blow up right there. And then, everything kind of pulled back here. And then NFTs went for an even bigger cycle throughout this move. But most altcoins did not make much noise throughout this period. This move, the Bitcoin went to 69,000. Yes, there were specific altcoins that made new all-time highs. If you're looking at altcoins like Solana, it made a massive new all-time high. Phantom made a big new all-time high. Terra Luna made a big new all-time high. But those were really the outliers of the entire cycle. Those were some of the best performing cryptos the entire time. So the outliers will always continue to be outliers, right? But for the big majority of the altcoins, pure euphoria took place at 65,000. And so this type of a move is just a little bit different than what we're seeing. Now, is it possible that we are just right here before we start this type of a move? Yeah, very possible, and I've talked about that a lot. And in the big picture, I do believe that the emotions are similar, but this cycle is just a little bit different in the way of this isn't a blow off top into a normal bear market. What I look at this as is being, like I talked about, it's a 4-wave correction before we ultimately start that next move in the cycle. However it looks, this could get way more volatile. What I was ultimately thinking was a move up to 30,000, at least back up to this $30,000 move. And then for us to even come back down and retest back down in here for a lengthier period of time. Ultimately, I'm not expecting a lot throughout the rest of this year. And that's where a lot of the volatility is going to be basically killing out all of the weak hands. When the volatility dries up, when the price is doing a lot of nothing, that's when we shake out a lot of the weak hands. And that's why I want you guys to remember back here at the bottom of this bear market, where we really only spent about 3 months worth of this sideways accumulation before having this large move to the upside. I can't tell you exactly how the bottom of this will look, but what I can show you is how vastly different it is when we're comparing it to prior cycle lows and in the bear markets. And another thing that we can look at is also just the percent return. This one is a 74% correction from the high to the low of the sell-off. And it also was the first cycle to ever retest a previous all-time high, right? We actually went below it. If we're looking at where the bottom of this wick retested, it was within the previous all-time high of the last cycle. It was when we first started breaking out over here. Now, when we're looking at that, for us to be sitting at a previous all-time high of the last cycle, for the first time in over 12 years of Bitcoin history, in my opinion, that is one of the greatest buying opportunities that we could have ever had. And it's another reason why I'm looking at this as being a lot different than, a prior bear market or what we would look at as a prior bear market. Because I don't look at this as a true cycle top. Like I've stated, guys, this is a wave 1, this is a wave 3, a wave 4, and I believe that what we're waiting for next is a final big picture wave 5 of a cycle. Once we get that type of a move, that's where we would ultimately look for a multi-year bear market to follow. I'm not saying Bitcoin's dead by any means. I'm just saying that we would most likely have a bigger picture cycle top that would play out. And so I wanted to go through this and kind of map out my thoughts here, because what we're seeing is a little bit of a variance in a lot of different ways. Our pi cycle low has flashed a buy signal. It's nailed all of the last bear markets so far. For us to be sitting at our previous all-time high, us also getting a pi cycle indication in here, we're doing all of this a lot earlier than where our 4-year cycle low would be in. Because if we're looking at this as a 4-year cycle low, our true cycle top would be over here at the end of the year, near the end of the year, basically the 1st of November. That we peaked at 69,000 about the November the 8th. And so that's why I was thinking that since we're already getting all of these buy signals that are coming in here, and we're getting all of them short of the 4-year cycle projected time frame, because where we need to be at for that signal to flash is going to be about here at about November 7th of 2022. So we have a few more months. What I ultimately believe plays out from here is for us to come back up and make contact or close to with this moving average. This red moving average we can see up here. I think that that's what this buy signal is telling us, that we're going to, in the short term, come back up and hit this. It's possible that we could make a large move, even upwards of 35, 40K. not going to write off any of those potentials. But no matter what happens, I do believe that a deeper correction will follow. Even if it's a move past this red line, we could see us go, all the way up to this $40,000 level, pull back onto support of this moving average, and then that could be something like our low before we start the next cycle. I'm not 100% sure, but I do expect us nonetheless to have somewhat of a sideways consolidation until the end of the year. After a big move happens, especially after a deep correction like this, the breakout point usually isn't super large. If we're looking in terms of the last cycle for Bitcoin, it can be. And we don't know what to expect with this cycle ultimately. But I do believe that we're going to come back up and retest this red resistance, because in prior bear markets, that's been a big pivot point. Even in this one, when we kind of just sat here and went sideways, I think that this is going to be a little bit of a different cycle because, normal bear markets have been a lot different. If we're looking at this one, we went sideways for quite a long time before. We got our pi cycle low, but our pi cycle low even came in here at the end of the year. It was still on those 4-year cycle time frames. This is the first one where we're getting our pi cycle low flashing, and it's happening before our projected 4-year cycle bottom and at the winter time frames, right? So that's why I was thinking that it's most likely after the breakout point, we're probably just going to go sideways until that 4-year cycle low flashes in. Once we get that signal, most likely that's when we actually begin the next major move into our bull run. But with this next move being a wave 5, I honestly think that this is going to be the one where we see true mainstream adoption in a huge degree of ways. A lot of profit this cycle, because this is where we should see, real euphoria. If we're looking at this on a big picture cycle and we're comparing, basically the last few years of this entire trend of Bitcoin, if we're comparing all of this and looking at it as where it is on this chart, basically, wave 1 would have been down here at the disbelief phase. Wave 3 would have been this here. So this entire move is right here, just hope. And then this move here, this big blow off top that we see, theoretically would be the next cycle that happens for us. And that's where I'm looking at this on a big picture market cycle. I still think that we're following roughly the same degree of trend, the same time frames that we followed in prior cycles. But the correction that we're seeing is vastly different than any of the prior bear markets. Where we're at in my picture Elliott wave count is just different than where we were in prior cycles as well. And so with us gearing up for what I view as a wave 5, it makes sense to me that we would have a multi-year bear market after, because that's ultimately why, that's just a bigger picture Elliott wave cycle that would be playing out. And it's also going to be pretty much 15 years worth of a Bitcoin consolidation. And it's also at a point where we're actually getting mainstream adoption, and have since 2018. Since the 2018 bear market, institutions have came in, they've been buying Bitcoin, they've been accumulating Bitcoin. And so I actually do think that we're getting relatively close to true mainstream adoption. It's pretty easy to tell. A lot of celebrities are getting on board with NFTs. A lot of different people are getting on board with crypto. We're not seeing quite the same sort of market structure that we've seen in prior cycles. And I think all of that is pointing to mainstream adoption being the case. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you found value, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these amazing updates. If you guys want to join the Discord server, download my free ebook. Links are in the description for that. If you guys would also like to sign up for my video course Signals, follow the trades that I take, all of that fun stuff, links are in the description as well to sign up on my website. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. Thank you guys so much for the support of this channel. And with that being said, I will catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.